Hey everyone, it's your guy coming at you with a full-blown reality check on something that's shaking up the entire global order. And I'm not exaggerating. We talk a lot about chips, AI, and military budgets, but there's a quieter, more brutal shift happening right under our noses. The global auto industry. And I am not here to give you some fluff piece. I am here to lay out the raw numbers, the hard strategy, and the uncomfortable truth that the United States and the rest of the old guard is staring down the barrel of a massive disruption. So let's cut the crap and get straight into it. In 2025, China's total annual vehicle exports broke through 832,000 units. That's not a rounding error. That's a statement. They are number one globally by a mile. And get this, out of that total, 343,000 were new energy vehicles, EVs and hybrids, which is a staggering 70% jump year over year. In plain English, for every 2 Chinese cars shipped overseas, one of them is electric or hybrid. This isn't a slogan. This is industrial warfare won on factory floors, supply chains, and sheer scale. Now, I want you to really sit with that number for a second. 832,000, that's more cars than Ford sold in all of Europe last year. That's more than Toyota exported from Japan. And it's not just about quantity, it's about velocity. The growth rate alone tells you this isn't a fluke or a one-year spike. This is a sustained, relentless march that's been building for over a decade. Chinese automakers didn't just wake up one day and decide to conquer the world. They've been planning this, investing in research and development, building battery gigafactories, securing raw materials across Africa and South America, and perfecting their supply chains while the rest of us were busy arguing about quarterly earnings. But here's the question that'll blow your mind. Which country on earth imports the most Chinese cars? If you said Russia, you're warm. If you said some oil-soaked Middle Eastern petrostate, you're getting colder, the actual answer. It's a place that most Americans couldn't point to on a map, and I'll reveal that at number 1. But first, let's run the full countdown from 10th place all the way to the top. And by the time we're done, you'll see that the rule book for the global auto game has been thrown out the window, and China is writing a new one. Number 10, Kazakhstan, 211,500 units. Now, I know what you're thinking, Kazakh, this Central Asian country, half the time people stumble over its name, is actually China's deeply entrenched backyard stronghold. You want to know what driving in Kazakhstan looks like? Picture winter, so brutal your phone dies in your pocket, and highways that stretch for hundreds of miles through gravel, ice, and snow. In that environment, you don't need a refined European touring machine. You need a tank with a steering wheel. You need something that fires up at minus 30 degrees Celsius, rides high enough to clear ruts, has parts that won't bankrupt you, and can take a beating like a rented mule. Can a BMW do it? Sure, but the first repair bill will make you weep. Can a Toyota do it? Absolutely. But they'll strip out every creature comfort until you're driving a four-wheeled refrigerator. Chinese brands like Geely, Changan, Haval, BYD, and Chery. They've run extreme cold tests, beefed up suspensions, and priced parts so low that replacing them is a no-brainer. A typical Kazakh family can walk out with a panoramic sunroof, giant infotainment screen, heated seats, and all-wheel drive for less than half the cost of a base model European SUV. And the kicker, geography, China and Kazakhstan are connected by direct overland highways. The China-Europe road corridor ships cars straight out of Xinjiang in mere days, avoiding the months-long ocean shipping delays and port bottlenecks. Chinese automakers haven't just exported cars, they've built dealerships, parts warehouses, and full-time service teams right there in Kazakhstan. This isn't a hit and run, this is a long-term occupation. Today, Haval and Geely are so common on Kazakh streets that UE think they were local brands, and they're pulling in neighboring countries like Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan along the way. That's how you secure a region. And for us as Americans, this should ring alarm bells, because the same playbook they're using in Central Asia is exactly what they're doing right on our southern border. But more on that later. Number 9, Philippines, 256,700 units. For decades, Southeast Asia was Japanese territory, Toyota, Honda, Nissan. A holy trinity that passed down from fathers to sons to grandsons. Brand loyalty there was almost religious. But in 2025, Chinese automakers tore a massive hole in that fortress, with growth rates blowing past industry averages. How in 3 words? Intelligence and value. In the Philippines, for the same money, a Japanese car gives you cloth seats, analog gauges, and a backup sensor that's an extra cost option. A Chinese car gives you a giant touchscreen, panoramic glass roof, advanced driver assist, and a 360-degree camera system. It's like comparing a flip phone to the latest smartphone at the same price. That's what we call a generational knockout. The Philippines is a sprawling archipelago with horrific city traffic, so small SUVs and compact crossovers are the kings of the road. Chinese brands like BYD, Lynk & Company, and MG rolled out affordable small SUVs and plug-in hybrids that hit the bullseye for local needs. On top of that, the Philippine government is pushing hard on EV adoption, subsidies, tax exemptions, no driving restrictions, so the policy winds are at China's back. Now, in Metro Manila, Chinese EVs are the hot choice for young professionals, and the old Japanese monopoly is being chipped away. One buyer at a time, the Philippines is the first domino to fall, and it won't be the last. And here's the thing, Southeast Asia is a region of 650 million people with rapidly growing middle classes. If China locks down that market, they've effectively captured the third largest economic bloc in Asia. That's not just about cars, that's about influence standard setting and supply chain dominance for the next generation. Number 8, Australia, 297,400 units. This one carries more weight than the previous two combined because Australia is a fully developed first world market with what I call the triple threat: sky-high safety standards, brutal environmental regulations, and consumers who know their stuff. To win in Australia, your car has to pass some of the toughest tests on the planet. This isn't a price war in a developing nation. This is a straight-up quality fight. For generations, Australians trusted only Toyota, Ford, Mitsubishi, and Volkswagen. Brand loyalty that spanned 3 generations, but in just the last couple of years, Chinese EVs have blown open that fortress. And the key was electrification. Australia has abundant electricity, a population that genuinely cares about the environment. And one of the highest EV acceptance rates in the developed world, BYD's Han, Tang, and Yuan Plus, along with MG's electric lineup, came in with longer range, smarter cabins, more stable battery tech, and far fewer reliability issues than their European rivals, all at a significantly lower price. And Australians are obsessed with resale value and dependability. After years of real-world testing, Chinese cars have gone from curious new entrant to smart, safe buy. And that reputational shift is worth more than any single sales figure. By 2025, Chinese autos are firmly in the top 3 of all imported vehicles in Australia. That's not luck. That's a certification stamp from the developed world. Think about what that means. A country that's part of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, a key US partner in the Pacific, is now deeply reliant on Chinese cars. That's not just an economic shift, it's a strategic vulnerability that our allies are choosing to accept because the value proposition is simply too strong to ignore. Number 7, Belgium, 300,100 units. I know what you're thinking, Belgium, a country smaller than most US states with barely 11 million people, and they're taking 300,000 Chinese cars. How? The answer is simple. They don't absorb them all themselves. Belgium is China's revolving door into Europe. It sits right next to Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. And it boasts some of the best port infrastructure, auto warehousing, and distribution networks on the continent. The vast majority of those cars land at the port of Antwerp, get unloaded, and within days they're scattered across the entire European Union. That 300,000 number, a huge chunk ends up in Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. Belgium is a corridor, a springboard, and a battering ram. It's how China knocks on Europe's front door. And even domestically, Belgium's EV policies are ultra-friendly. No fuel taxes, no purchase taxes, running costs that are almost laughably low. So Chinese EVs sell like hotcakes there too. But here's the strategic jewel: premium Chinese brands like NIO, Xpeng, Zeekr, and Yangwang all chose Belgium as their first European landing pad to pass the US strict certifications to win over picky European consumers and to build a reputation before radiating outward to the rest of the continent. So number 7 might not look flashy, but its strategic value is absolutely off the charts. And for those of us watching from America, we should take note: if Chinese cars can pass Europe's notoriously tough safety and emission standards, they can pass ours too. It's only a matter of time before they're fully certified to sell in all 50 states. Number 6, Saudi Arabia, 302,200 units. Now this is where it gets almost absurd. Saudi Arabia, the kingdom with the world's largest proven oil reserves, where gasoline is cheaper than bottled water. and they're buying Chinese cars like they're going out of style. And not just EVs, everything, luxury sedans, family SUVs, cheap commuters, you name it, for decades. The high-end Saudi market was Mercedes, BMW, and Lexus territory. The mid-range was Toyota and Nissan Turf. Then Chinese brands showed up and launched a full-spectrum assault at the top. Hongqi and Yangwang are breaking into Dubai-level luxury circles with custom-built limousines and SUVs. In the middle, Geely, Changan, and Chery are selling tough, reliable, affordable family haulers. And in the EV space, BYD and MG are winning over young Saudis with massive screens, autonomous driving features, and futuristic interiors that make traditional gas cars look like museum pieces. And no, cheap gas doesn't kill EV demand, because Saudi youth aren't buying fuel, they're buying technology status. And the cool factor, and let's not forget the climate, summer temperatures in Saudi can hit 50 degrees Celsius. So Chinese automakers have beefed up air conditioning, upgraded heat shielding, installed desert-specific cooling systems, and run every export model through extreme high-temperature stability tests. On top of that, deep China-Saudi trade deals give them tariff advantages and stable shipping lanes. By 2025, Chinese brands account for over 30% of all new vehicle imports in Saudi Arabia, from government fleets to private driveways. An oil superpower running on Chinese wheels. That's a picture you need to sit with for a minute. And here's the geopolitical angle that matters to us. Saudi Arabia is a long-standing U.S. ally. The anchor of the petrodollar system. If their streets are filled with Chinese cars, what else are they buying from Beijing? Ports, railways, 5G networks, maybe even military hardware. The auto industry is just the tip of the iceberg. Number 5, Brazil, 322,100 units. Brazil is the 800-pound gorilla of South America. Biggest population, biggest economy, biggest auto market on the continent. For decades, the Japanese and Americans owned the place. Toyota, Ford, and General Motors were the three untouchable giants, but in the last 3 years, Chinese automakers have flipped the script completely, with sales skyrocketing year after year and rewriting the entire regional playbook. Brazil's roads, urban centers are perpetual parking lots, and rural areas are mostly unpaved mud tracks. You need a car that sips fuel and shrugs off potholes like they're nothing. Chinese gas cars are exactly that, durable, economical, and dirt cheap to fix. And with the Brazilian government pushing hard on clean energy subsidies, Chinese hybrids and pure EVs have spread like wildfire. Stable trade policies, mature cross-border logistics, and local factories, Chery, BYD, Great Wall, and Jiangxi have all set up assembly plants in Brazil, producing locally and selling locally, slashing costs and maximizing competitiveness. These 4 brands are perennially in Brazil's top seller list, and Chinese cars are no longer exotic newcomers, they're mainstream choices. And Brazil is the gateway to the entire southern cone, Argentina, Chile, Colombia. You name it. The whole supply chain is already laid out. Brazil is China's Normandy Beach in South America, plain and simple. Now, from a U.S. perspective, this is our own hemisphere. South America has traditionally been our backyard, our sphere of influence, and we're watching China walk in and take over the auto market. And by extension, the infrastructure, the logistics, and the economic relationships that come with it. The Monroe Doctrine feels pretty outdated when Chinese cars are rolling off assembly lines in Eside or Opalo. Number 4, United Kingdom, 335,600 units. Let that number sink in. The UK, birthplace of the modern automobile. Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Jaguar, Land Rover. These are brands that defined automotive excellence for over a century. A country that practically invented the car. Just a few years ago, Chinese cars couldn't even get a foothold there. British reviewers laughed at them like cheap toys, but in 2025, China ranks 4th in UK auto imports. That's not a niche victory, that's planting a flag on the enemy's home turf. The breakthrough? 4 words: energy transition mandate. The UK has one of the most aggressive timelines in the world to ban new petrol and diesel car sales. The problem is, British domestic EV production is a joke. European factories are bottlenecked, prices are astronomical, and delivery waits are measured in months, if not years. So the market had a massive, screaming gap, and China, with the world's most complete EV supply chain, enormous manufacturing capacity, and battle-tested battery tech, filled that gap overnight. MG, BYD, Zeekr, NIO. They're everywhere in Britain. Now, MG, especially with its historic British badge combined with Chinese engineering and cost discipline, has been the #1 selling EV in the UK for multiple quarters. In London, Manchester, and Birmingham, Chinese electric cars glide silently through the streets. And that silence is the sound of a century-old car nation, now depending on imports from its former colonial supplier. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a wrench. And for us in America, this should be a wake-up call. If the British, who invented the modern car industry, can't compete with Chinese EVs on their own soil, what makes us think we're immune? Our own EV transition is stumbling. Our charging infrastructure is patchy, and our legacy automakers are struggling to catch up. Meanwhile, China is selling polished, affordable, reliable EVs to one of our closest allies. Number 3, UAE 571,900 units. Now we jump an entire order of magnitude. The UAE has a population of under 10 million, so how in the world do they absorb nearly 600,000 Chinese cars? They don't, not by themselves. Dubai and Abu Dhabi are the world's premier auto transshipment hubs, world-class ports, frictionless logistics, near zero tariffs, and free trade zones that make redistribution a breeze. Most of those cars land in the UAE, a fraction stay for local buyers. And the rest are re-exported west into Africa, south across the Middle East, north into West Asia, and even into parts of Europe. The UAE is China's Grand Central Station for 3 continents. And locally, Emirati buyers are famously brand agnostic. They don't care about legacy or nationality. They care about design, features, and price. And Chinese cars win on all 3 sleek styling, tech-loaded interiors, and competitive pricing that undercuts rivals by thousands. At the high end, Hongqi and Yangwang are rubbing shoulders with Bentleys and Rolls in Dubai's luxury showrooms. In the mass market, BYD, Geely, and Changan dominate the value segment. With the UAE's EV charging infrastructure expanding rapidly, Chinese electrics are the top pick for young locals and the massive expatriate workforce alike. That 571,000 figure isn't just sales. It's a signal that China has unlocked the central nervous system of global auto trade. And here's the thing about transshipment hubs. They're not just about cars. They're about logistics networks, banking relationships, and long-term commercial partnerships. Once a country like the UAE is deeply integrated into China's supply chain, it becomes a node in a much larger system, one that increasingly excludes us influence. Number 2, Russia 582,700 units. Let's rewind the tape a few years ago due to geopolitical shocks that I don't need to name. Almost every Western and Japanese automaker pulled out of Russia, Toyota, Volkswagen, Mercedes, BMW, Ford, all gone. Overnight, one of the world's largest auto markets was left with a gaping, cavernous hole. Who stepped in? Only China. And they didn't just fill the void, they flooded it. Russia is vast, freezing, and covered in ice and snow for half the year. A car there has to be a survival machine, starts at minus 40 degrees Celsius. Non-negotiable. Chassis doesn't crack on frozen potholes. Mandatory runs for hundreds of miles without a service station and doesn't break down. Absolutely critical. Chinese gas cars have been tuned for extreme cold with minimal failure rates. Chinese EVs have proprietary low-temperature range preservation tech. Today, 7 out of every 10 new cars sold in Russia are Chinese. Chery, Haval, Geely, BYD, and Changan hold the top 5 spots across sedans, SUVs, and light commercial vehicles. In 2025, Russia's imports dipped slightly from their peak, losing the #1 global spot, but they still held at nearly 600,000 units. This isn't a temporary spike, it's a structural dependency. Trade channels are rock solid, consumer trust is high, and after-sales networks are fully built out. Russia is still China's most fortified overseas auto fortress, and from a U.S. strategic standpoint, this is the most direct challenge to our post-Cold War order. Russia, our primary geopolitical adversary, is now economically intertwined with China through the auto industry, and that relationship extends to energy, minerals, defense, and everything else. We've effectively pushed Russia into China's arms, and the auto sector is one of the strongest welds in that new alliance. #1, Mexico 625,200 units, and here it is, the big one. Mexico just surpassed Russia to become the world's largest importer of Chinese vehicles in 2025. This is the single biggest shakeup in years, completely rewriting the global rankings. But why Mexico? It's not a population giant like India, not a traditional auto powerhouse like Germany. So how did it beat Russia and the UAE? Three reasons. First, it's right next to the United States. Mexico is a core member of the USMCA trade bloc. And shipping from China's west coast across the Pacific to Mexico's west coast is short, cheap, and ridiculously efficient. Compared to hauling cars across the Eurasian steppe to Russia or navigating around half the globe to Brazil, Mexico is a logistical goldmine, pure geographic leverage. Second, and this is the real strategic nuke, Mexico is the only viable backdoor into the North American market due to tariff barriers and trade restrictions. Direct Chinese vehicle exports to the U.S. face punitive duties, regulatory red tape, and political landmines. But by shipping to Mexico, doing local assembly or light manufacturing, and then re-exporting to the U.S. and Canada, Chinese automakers can effectively bypass those barriers. Mexico is the Trojan horse that puts Chinese cars on the doorstep of the American consumer. That 625,000 number is huge, but its strategic meaning is even bigger. It's a beachhead for the entire North American continent. And third, Mexico's domestic demand is exploding. Young population with rapidly rising car ownership rates, first-time buyers, family upgrades, fleet replacements, a triple whammy of demand. Mexico's own auto production capacity can't keep up, so imports are essential. Chinese cars offer high-value broad model ranges and full coverage. From cheap commuter runabouts to family SUVs to hybrids and pure EVs, all at price points that undercut established brands, 625,200 isn't just a number, it's a strategic milestone. It means China, after locking down Eurasia and building bridges into Africa and the Middle East, has now officially stepped into North America. Mexico is the bridgehead. The United States is the ultimate prize. History has shown time and again, whoever controls the North American auto market defines the global industry's future. And right now, we're watching that future being built in Chinese factories and Mexican assembly plants, not in Detroit or Silicon Valley. Now, let's zoom out and connect the dots, because this isn't just about cars, it's about the reordering of global economic power. When I look at this list, from Kazakhstan to Mexico, what I see is a deliberate, methodical strategy that would make any Pentagon wargamer proud. China isn't randomly dumping cars everywhere. They're systematically building beachheads in every major region: Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Oceania, Europe, the Middle East, South America, and now North America. Each market serves a purpose. Some are volume absorbers, some are transshipment hubs, some are quality certification proving grounds, and some, like Mexico, are strategic backdoors into the most lucrative auto market on earth, which is right here in the United States, and here's where it gets personal for us as Americans. We've spent over a century building the world's most iconic automotive industry. Ford, GM, Tesla, the whole nine yards. We invented mass production, we defined car culture, we put the world on wheels. But right now, we're watching a foreign competitor do what we used to do better than anyone: outproduce, out-innovate, and outmaneuver, and they're not doing it with cheap, shoddy knockoffs. They're doing it with cars that routinely beat established brands in quality surveys, with battery technology that's years ahead of most Western competitors. And with a supply chain that's so integrated and efficient that even our own automakers rely on Chinese components to stay competitive. Think about that for a second. The same country that many in Washington love to paint as a strategic competitor is now selling more cars globally than anyone else. And they're parked in our own backyard in Mexico, ready to roll north. The USMCA was supposed to protect North American manufacturing, but it's turning into a backdoor for Chinese EVs and parts to flood our market. Our politicians are busy arguing about tariffs and trade wars. But the reality is, the Chinese auto industry has already adapted. They've built factories in Mexico, they're hiring local workers, they're integrating into North American supply chains, and they're playing the long game while we're still debating the rules of the last century. And it's not just about the cars themselves, it's about the jobs, the technology, the intellectual property, and the geopolitical leverage that comes with being the world's undisputed auto king. When every emerging economy, from Brazil to Saudi Arabia to the Philippines, starts to see Chinese cars as the default choice, that's not just a commercial victory, that's soft power on four wheels. It means Chinese standards become global standards. Chinese supply chains become global supply chains. Chinese battery tech, Chinese software, Chinese design language, all of it becomes the new normal. And the United States, which once defined the global auto industry, risks becoming a footnote. Now, I'm not here to panic you. I'm here to wake you up. This isn't about being anti-China. It's about being pro-American realism. We need to understand what's happening so we can respond intelligently, because the numbers don't lie. 832,000 exports in 2025 is just the beginning. Every single country on this list represents a future growth vector, and they're all leaning into Chinese vehicles, not because they're forced to, but because they genuinely offer better value, better tech, and better adaptability than most alternatives. 10 years ago, if you told me that Mexico would be the top importer of Chinese cars, I'd have laughed. 10 years ago, if you told me Saudi Arabia would be buying Chinese EVs, I'd have said you were crazy. But here we are, in 2026, and the landscape has completely flipped. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to keep pretending that tariffs alone will solve the problem, or are we going to rebuild our own manufacturing base, invest in next-generation battery tech, and compete head-to-head? Because history doesn't reward the complacent, it rewards the agile, the innovative, and the strategic. Let me be blunt with you. We've got three options. Option one, we double down on tariffs and protectionism, hoping to keep Chinese cars out of our market. But that's like trying to hold back the tide with a broom, because they're already building factories in Mexico, and USMCA rules make it very difficult to block vehicles that are substantially assembled in North America. Option two, we go all in on our own EV and battery production, with massive government investment, tax incentives, and a national strategy that treats the auto industry as a matter of national security. That's what China did, and it worked. Option three, we do nothing, and we watch the Chinese auto industry and all the supply chains, jobs, and geopolitical leverage that come with it become the global standard. And I don't know about you, but option three doesn't sound like a winning strategy to me. But here's the thing. We've got advantages that China doesn't. We have the world's most innovative tech sector, the deepest capital markets, and a culture of entrepreneurship that's unmatched anywhere else. We have Tesla, which is still the global leader in EV tech, even if they're being squeezed from all sides. We have legacy automakers that are finally waking up and pouring billions into electrification. And we have the largest consumer market on earth, with consumers who are willing to pay a premium for quality, safety, and brand prestige. The question is whether we have the political will and the strategic vision to actually get our act together and compete. So that's the full picture: 10 countries, 10 strategic moves, one massive global shift, from the frozen steppes of Kazakhstan to the desert highways of Saudi Arabia, from the congested streets of Manila to the luxury showrooms of Dubai, and finally, right to our own southern border in Mexico. Chinese cars are everywhere. And the message is clear: the old order is over, and a new one is being written, whether we like it or not. Now, I want to leave you with this thought. We have spent decades telling ourselves that American innovation, American quality, and American know-how are unbeatable. And in many ways, they still are. But the Chinese aren't playing the old game. They've changed the rules. They've built an industrial machine that's faster, cheaper, and more adaptable than anything we've ever seen. And they're not just selling cars. They're selling a vision of the future where they're at the center of the global economy. The question is, are we going to let that happen, or are we going to roll up our sleeves and fight for our place in the world? I want to hear from you. Which of these 10 countries surprised you the most? Do you think the US can catch up, or are we watching an irreversible shift? What should we do about Mexico becoming China's gateway to North America? Drop your takes in the comments. And as always, stay sharp, question everything, and I'll see you in the next one.